So back in January, a story flew under the radar that is worth discussing, and it wasn't discussed because the mainstream media has no idea what this even means. But at the 100-day mark of the war in Israel, October 7th, the military spokesman for Hamas gave a televised speech about the Hamas efforts, as well as a reminder of the purpose of the war. Now, this was translated into English by the Palestinian Chronicle, which, gosh, I must have missed this issue of it, and it just came to my attention. But I want you to listen carefully to what this guy said. Quote, "We look back 100 days to remember the educated, the complicit, the incapacitated among the world powers governed by the law of the jungle, reminding them of an aggression that reached its peak against our path, Al-Quds and Al-Aqsa." Al-Quds is the Muslim name for Jerusalem, and Al-Aqsa is the mosque that is on top of the Temple Mount. Reminding them of an aggression that reached its peak against, translating in Jerusalem, and the Temple Mount, with the start of its actual temporal and spatial division. What? They started to reach peak at the start of the Jews' actual temporal and spatial division and, quoting, "the bringing of red cows as an application of a detestable religious myth designed for aggression against the feelings of an entire nation in the heart of its Arab identity and the path of its prophet and the ascension into heaven." What did you get out of that, Stu? What the temporal and spatial division? What's that? That sounds kind of mystical, doesn't it?
It does sound mystical, yes.
And the bringing of red cows as an application of a detestable religious myth. Well, we should look in to what that is. The bringing of red cows as part of a detestable myth. Okay. Red heifers are the detestable religious myth, according to the leader of Hamas. A red heifer in the Old Testament, to be sacrificed, has to have no more than 2 black or white hairs, and they check them. I mean, I think there's probably, I'm guessing there's a rabbi squad that goes out, and they look and they check the heifer. It has to be unblemished, all red hair. And that's a 1 in 50,000 chance that your red heifer is going to be born like that. And it cannot have more than 2 black or white hairs, even before having their ears tagged, a common practice with livestock that would disqualify them for ceremonial use. But these 4 heifers remain blemish-free. And according to the Temple Institute rabbis, they want to carry out this detestable, what did he call it, myth and a ceremony before Passover. So just before Easter. Only 9 heifers have been sacrificed since Moses. 9. And that happened between Moses and the year 70 AD. And the feeling is, or the myth of the Bible, is the 10th red heifer ceremony would bring in the Messianic age. Now, I don't know about you, but those people who are like, I think Jesus is coming soon, they're so crazy. So I don't believe any of that craziness. But they bring in the Messianic age. Now, people who are religious Christians, they believe that that is the first step to rebuilding the third temple. And it has to be built before the Antichrist comes and desecrates it. Of course, I mean, he wouldn't desecrate it and then they'd build it, but then the Messiah comes. Some of us believe that's Jesus, and he had a return ticket when he came the first time. So he's coming again. Now, what does this mean? Where did this come from? Why is Hamas saying 100 days into the war, it was the transfer of these red heifers from Texas to Israel that played a role in October 7th. I've been to Israel several times. I have never been to the top of the Temple Mount because I was asked by the state of Israel not to go. I was asked by Benjamin Netanyahu, who was the prime minister at the time when I was there last, and they were worried about any appearance on top of the Temple Mount causing a stir because of, I stand for Israel, I've been recognized, et cetera, et cetera. I know people who have gone. Ben Shapiro just went, and he prayed on the Temple Mount. Praying on the Temple Mount as a Christian, but especially a Jew, is not looked on kindly by Muslims, but many people do it. If you've never been to Israel, you don't understand the role of the Temple Mount itself. We've been talking here the last few minutes about red heifers. Red heifers are important for a purification process that needs to be done before the Temple Mount can be restored and the temple can be rebuilt on it. This is something that Hamas, really, its charter came from. This is a story that has not been really even heard in Israel. Secular Israelis probably are not even aware or interested in the presence of the red heifers in Israel. And if you're not religious, it probably means nothing to you. However, Hamas has just pointed out that they are at least following the red heifer story close enough to use it as the stated reason to launch the surprise invasion and attack that they called the Al-Aqsa flood, Al-Aqsa Mosque. The mosque is the third holiest site in Islam. This is where there was the mythical journey of Muhammad, and he was brought from Mecca to the Temple Mount on some sort of donkey with wings, and he went up to heaven, and he received instruction on Islamic prayer, and then he returned back to Mecca the next morning. So that's the claim on the Temple Mount. The Hamas terror attack on October 7th is really the work of the guy that we've talked about on this program, the Grand Mufti. The Grand Mufti became, in the 1920s, the father of radical Islam. That's what he's called. He was the first to bring up discussions about Al-Aqsa and the Third Temple and bring it front and center. The Jewish people were immigrating and coming in the 1920s to Israel. And Husseini, the Grand Mufti, he was able to spread his anti-Semitism and the idea that the Jews were coming to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque to rebuild the Third Temple. Third Temple is instrumental. If the Third Temple is not rebuilt, then that stops the prophecy of the return of the Messiah. So it has to be rebuilt. How is that going to happen with the Al-Aqsa Mosque on top? Don't know. Well, he got everybody wound up so much, it peaked in 1929, and they went on a terror raid a lot like October 7th on the Jewish holiday that commemorates the destruction of the two previous temples. So Jews were going to the Western Wall to pray. They were attacked by Arab Muslims under the Grand Mufti because he said they were going there to tear the Al-Aqsa Mosque down. Lots of people were hurt and killed, the Jews, because Al-Aqsa was in danger. This guy did not go away after this. The Grand Mufti in 1937 was exiled from Jerusalem, and he sought asylum in a country that thought a lot like him. In 1937, he went to Berlin, Germany, where he met with Adolf Hitler, helped form the Muslim SS squad that was, scooping up Jews. And he even hosted a radio show. And he was talking about how much Islam and the Nazis have in common. So this is what they were marching about then, and this is why they are now saying they are going after the Jews now. If you don't know, the Hamas charter is widely accepted as one of the most anti-Semitic documents in history. It lays out a direct call to annihilate the Jewish people, along with promoting jihad as the only solution and a responsibility for every Muslim. In fact, this is the Grand Mufti's ultimate solution for protecting the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You got to kill all the Jews to protect the mosque. Does it make a little more sense now that you see October 7th, the Al-Aqsa flood, and this ideology? So in the 100-day speech, the 100 days after the war began, after October 7th, the statement from the Hamas spokesperson is the first statement directly to address the red heifers, which came from Texas and are now in Israel. He is now saying that this is not just because of the red heifers, but because there is also Jewish people praying on the Temple Mount, and a growing number of people praying on the Temple Mount. Early on the morning of October 7th, Hamas issued a statement via the military commander who justified the attack as retaliation for Israel's desecration of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. It wasn't just the heifers, but also prayer, Jewish prayer on the temple, which has been allowed. It's controversial, but it's allowed. So the problem is that Jewish people think that it has been desecrated by the Muslims. Muslims say it's being desecrated by the Jews. If you're going to rebuild the temple, you need to purify it. And purifying it, according to the book of Numbers, chapter 19, is a heifer, a red heifer ceremony that results in the creation of ash and water mixture, and that cleanses the entire nation of Israel from ritual impurity. And then the ceremony requires some of the blood to be sprinkled at the front of the tabernacle, and that later became the temple. It usually took place at the Mount of Olives, where they are planning on doing this again in the coming days. It is essential for all aspects of the temple and temple worship to take place. In addition, anyone participating in temple worship would be required to be sprinkled with the ash water. Beyond that, even without the presence of a physical temple, the ceremony would allow the general population to be ritually cleansed and remove much of the religious prohibition for a Jewish presence on the Temple Mount. When are they planning on doing it? Well, they imported these red heifers before October 7th. We now know that Hamas said that this was part of the reason, because they're going to use the red heifers to purify the temple, which is desecration to them, purifying them so they can then actually go up, and even if there is no temple, they can pray as if they were in the temple. They are going to do this Passover weekend, so Easter weekend. That may be a very violent weekend in Israel if we are to take Hamas at its words that no media is reporting on. You don't have to believe the red heifer thing. I do. I believe they believe it, and I believe that the third temple is part of the return of Christ or the coming of the Messiah. And I look at these things seriously because I know the Middle East looks at them seriously, and I believe in the return of the Messiah. We should be watchful. We are told to look for these things. And I think the best thing that we can do is pray. The best thing we can do is prepare ourselves spiritually, temporally, physically, prepare for uncertain times. I don't know if this happens, but I know people have been working on this to happen, since 70. And it looks like it could happen in the next couple of weeks. The sacrifice of the 10th red heifer.